The grand banquet hall pulsed with stifled laughter and muted echoes. The palace stones were cold and dark, mirroring the frigid heart of the court that surrounded me. Flickering candlelight danced in crystal chandeliers, but beneath the gleam, the sharp claws of the nobles lay hidden. As I poured goblets of deep red wine at a table brimming with arrogance, my eyes drifted to the king's daughter. The contrast between her silver hair and the oppression that enveloped her etched itself onto my soul. She seemed so out of place amidst the court's pettiness, a shadow among these voracious sharks. The nobles resonated their disdain with malicious smirks, each colder than the last. "How does she even look at herself in the mirror?" whispered a lady-in-waiting, and countless laughs followed, an echo of pain. My stomach churned as I listened to the poison in their words. The audience reveled in the cruelty as if it were a rare delicacy. It was in these moments that rage consumed me, a low, intense fire. I polished the stemware to hide the tension building within me. Why does she stay there? I wondered. What kept her standing in the face of so many cutting stares? A certainty began to form. She needed help. She needed someone to see her, to hear her. Then an enigmatic woman, adorned with enchanted jewels, cast her penetrating gaze upon the princess and glided towards her. "Ah, sweet creature, what troubles your pale complexion? A curse or merely the burden of imperfection?" The comment, wrapped in acidic laughter, cut through the space. The laughs echoed like sharp blades, and the despair on the princess's face was a reflection of shame, an image that resonated deep in my memory. A strong, almost primitive impulse seized me. Without thinking, I set aside the wine bottles and approached. Insecurity lurked in my chest, but determination surged. When our gazes met, a small flame of hope flickered in her eyes. I could be the bridge between the court's cruel ironies and the outside world. The cruelty pulsating there tried to intimidate me, but I found strength in my purpose. It wasn't just the king's daughter at stake. There was a broader space for outsiders, for marginalized souls yearning for acceptance. I took a deep breath. I can't stand by, I thought. I had to help her. Fear gave way to a subtle fervor, and with a silent gesture of my hand, I initiated non-verbal communication. The warmth of the touch, however discreet, would be something she could feel deep in her heart. A small space for a comforting silence. The banquet continued its grotesque dance, but amidst the gloom, a connection began to form. Feeling the pressure of the moment, words of courage piled up in my mind, deciding I would no longer be silenced. It was time to silence the mockery and perhaps create a new reality. The idea pulsed like a heart beating bravely in the dark, waiting for a sign. Memories of my childhood were like morning mist, intense and fleeting. Each fragment vibrated with an echo that refused to fade. I remembered playing as a child in dusty alleyways, where laughter was as scarce as food. The sky seemed a heavy cloak, and the wind carried whispers of scorn. It was a place where fragility came at a cost, and being different was a condemnation. My mother taught me to see beyond appearances. In our humble dwelling, she used to tell stories of people who defied conventions and shone through the darkness. In her words, I found refuge. "The most precious beauty is that which shines from within," she would say, tracing lines of meaning on our home's walls. Each of these stories shaped my heart, and even when I faced life's brutality, there was a warm embrace of hope in her lessons. But the world outside our home was a constricted, unforgiving place, and it had its own rules. I remembered the mockery in the town squares, the scornful glances when I crossed paths with nobles in their sumptuous finery. "You don't belong here," murmured the silence that surrounded me. Disdain and indifference were constant companions in my youth, and I learned to fight with the only weapon I had: empathy. As memories danced in my head, I felt a strong, irresistible call. It was time to act, to rise in defense of the king's daughter. I couldn't let her go through what I had. The court's brutality echoed my own childhood, unbearable to hear, but I had to face it. Every humiliation she suffered resonated within me, a call to action. I looked again at the princess, alone in a sea of mockery. The light in her eyes seemed to dim, and with it a protective fierceness grew within me. I awoke to the idea that if I didn't do something, the very struggle for acceptance my mother had taught me could be lost in the shadows of indifference. I decided my fight would not be in vain. Thus, I began to devise a silent strategy. The first step was to approach the king's daughter, no longer merely a server but an ally. A silent language of gestures danced in my mind, ready to form a powerful and meaningful defense. I would lead her out of this darkness, and just as my mother had done for me, I would become a beacon in her life. In the moments we spent together, unspoken words became our bond, a connection forged from mutual understanding. In that cruel banquet hall, we were two souls confined under the gaze of the powerful, finding comfort in a friendship that blossomed amidst oppression. Every smile became a silent pact, promising support and resistance to a system that mistreated and belittled. But at the same time, the court's eyes were always watching, suspicious of any deviation. The whispering intrigues corroding the air in the room were palpable, and I knew time was short. We needed to act before the cycle of mockery could consume us. It was only a matter of time before the court would turn on us like a pack of wolves, ready to destroy anything that questioned its authority. With a clear goal established, fragments of the past now intertwined into a possible future, painting a picture of hope in the dark world where we were prisoners. The struggle for acceptance began to take shape, and for the first time, I believed that perhaps together we could find a light in this endless night. The following night brought a storm to the palace, thunder echoing as if the very heavens were in rebellion. Tension hung in the air, and the court, already accustomed to dealing with intrigues and betrayals, seemed more restless than usual. As I served goblets of wine during the banquet, the atmosphere stifled my impulse to act. Time was running out, and I couldn't continue to let this cycle of mockery repeat itself. It was at this point of vulnerability and dropped masks that I perceived the opening, the fragility of the line separating the ironies of power. As the purist commander discoursed on the importance of lineage and maintaining the purity of the vampiric race, I listened intently to his affected gestures. His words were venomous, but there was a bluster and crudeness in his manner that drew me in. He believed the suppression of the king's daughter was necessary. His arrogance and contempt made her an easier target. With that, an idea formed in my mind. Before the net closed in, we needed to strike first. In our silent conversations, I noticed the princess's fragility manifest in her gestures. She shared the anxieties that plagued her, the burden of being an outsider in the court. Her vulnerability didn't make her weak, but made her more real, more human. With her almost inaudible whisper, she touched on ideas that intertwined in a world of oppressive norms, and I could see beyond the frame of what everyone expected of her. I decided that the friendship we had forged could serve as a bulwark against the court's cruelty. A true connection needed to be established, like a ritual of empowerment that would transform us into one, aligned against the current. So I began to share stories about life outside the palace walls, transmitting messages in sign language, our silent bridge, our flame in the rain. While the storm outside raged, my mind seethed with preparation. The court was preparing for a new event, a celebration that promised more of the same. Glamour for the powerful and disdain for those deemed inferior. It's the right moment, I thought. We needed to infiltrate it, raising our voices amidst the clamor of hypocrisy. We would be the first to draw attention, and that would be the opportunity to expose everything hidden beneath the surface. A plan began to form, and with each gesture and every sign, the connection between us grew stronger. Once we established a bond, our daring intentions began to crystallize. We could take the first step. However, the court's gazes were predatory, always seeking any sign of weakness, ready to deliver the fatal blow. Knowing this, we decided we needed to act quickly before any suspicion could form. Plots loomed, and I wondered if we could truly handle what was to come. The night of the event unfolded, and my heart pounded with every beat. It was time to embrace the fervent indignation. With the ring that belonged to the princess's mother hidden in my pocket as a symbol of our determination, we entered the banquet hall as two fearless figures prepared to confront the court's pride. I felt the electricity of the moment as I enveloped her in silent gestures. A shared pact that echoed in every corner of the room. The music began to play, and the dance of power was about to begin anew. In that instant, the pulse of hope and determination grew. The supper of ridicule had reached its climax, and it was becoming increasingly clear we were more than mere server and princess. We were already accomplices, ready to write our own destiny. The banquet hall pulsed with life, a spectacle of opulence that concealed the true nature of its glamour. Nobles with impassive faces offered sharp smiles, ready to devour any exposed weakness. I felt the tension in the air and the urgency growing within me. The oppression of that elite was palpable, and the idea that dignity could be broken while they reveled guided me like a lamp in the darkness. As the banquet progressed, the tension mounted. The head of the court, a man with a hypnotic voice and piercing gaze, rose, capturing everyone's attention. "Maintaining the purity of our lineage is a non-negotiable duty," he proclaimed, his words resonating like a blow. I knew I had to act before this poison spread unchecked. The right moment approached, an opportunity to confront the inequalities and open the court's eyes. With the sign language we developed, I established a connection with the princess, transmitting my determination. "It's time to show them who we are," I gestured, a pact forming between us. Together, we were the silent connection amidst the cacophony. The ring I carried symbolized our bond and our resistance. Finally, when the noble paused in his speech, I raised my voice to interrupt the cycle of conformity that dominated the room. "True purity isn't in blood," I declared, causing many heads to turn in my direction. "It resides in the humanity each of us carries." "Dutaladin," the murmur that spread through the room, was a mix of confusion and disdain, but what troubled me most were the looks of disapproval that would soon turn to attack. The noble stared at me with contempt, his features hardening. "Empty words cannot shake a legacy," he retorted, raising his tone as if to put an end to the conversation. But his fury only highlighted his insecurities. I knew we had unleashed something greater than simple indignation. The words continued, mainly those of scorn, but a growing murmur of support began to rise among those who were also silenced. Resistance was taking shape. The glow of hope within me grew, and the recognition that our struggle could touch hearts did not fade from that malicious space. When the commotion finally subsided, a new tension gripped the room. It wasn't just a simple exchange of words, it was a preparation for something deeper that would unfold. I knew we were at a dangerous crossroads. Time was running out, and my silent complicity with the princess was a protection against the wounds that would surely follow. Then, with a final mute gesture of determination, I remembered what had guided me there. We were more than server and princess. We were allies, and this was just one phase of our destiny. Whatever happened next, it was certain. The revolution had begun. The silence in the room stretched like a heavy fog. The noble, aware of the impact of my declaration, seemed unwilling to back down. His eyes burned with indignation, and I sensed the control he wielded over the room began to unravel. The tension created fissures in the masks of control, and a murmur of support, timid at first, grew among those who felt imprisoned by his cruel words. My courage was a fragile crystal under the court's pressure. but the princess's presence by my side gave me strength. The change was palpable, like an undercurrent narrowing, poised to break the surface. I could see the expressions of some nobles transforming, and that spark that ignited the flame of hope became a rising inferno. But time was running out. We couldn't get lost in these small victories. With a decisive gesture, the princess passionately raised her voice. If purity is what we seek, then we must first purge the hypocrisy from our own souls. Every word of hers resonated with power in the air, like thunder. Gazes rained down on us, both admiring and furious. I couldn't ignore that we were dancing with danger. The noble, now visibly agitated, changed tactics. Insolent wretches! Would you dare question the very essence of our legacy? The commotion intensified, and the atmosphere became electric. I knew a storm was brewing, and the powerful would never hesitate to use their claws. At that moment, I decided that acting was the only way out. I looked at the princess, who met my gaze with silent determination. Resistance was taking shape in our words, but we needed to go beyond promises. With each passing second, the court's shadows crept closer, and a turning point became inevitable. I used a hand gesture that quickly signaled everyone to prepare for the unknown. "We need to gather those who feel our despair," I silently conveyed, keeping my gaze firmly fixed on hers. The insignificant daily grievances could very well turn into a rebel's cry. I traced a clear sign of alliance in the air, and the murmur turned into meaningful whispers among our closest allies. In that instant, a new group began to approach, a mix of disgruntled nobles and oppressed servants. I looked across the hall and realized that finally the whispers of resistance could unite. The silenced voices began to echo, and our struggle was no longer isolated. But as the alliance formed, the noble's fury grew. He moved through the hall like a predator ready to strike. "You don't know who you're dealing with," he shouted, agile ferocity in his stance. And then, like a lightning bolt that splits the sky, he pointed directly at us. "Foolish girls, you stand between tradition and destruction. You will pay for this audacity." My muscles tensed, adrenaline surging. Dread loomed, but the flame of determination burned brighter. I knew we needed to be swift. And it was at that instant that I glimpsed a way out. "Join us!" I raised my voice, echoing with courage. "Change begins with us. Who will dare to leave this place of oppression?" And in the palace shadows, we cast the first stone of an uprising. The ignition of the future was at our doorstep, and we were here to tear down the walls of indifference that imprisoned us. The conflict was forming, and there was no turning back. This battle for freedom began now. The tension in the room transformed into a storm about to erupt. Angry nobles and fearful servants raised their voices, creating a chaos that resonated like a symphony of revolt. I could feel the emotions swirling, fear, anger, and a flame of hope that began to spread among those who had previously felt unable to rise. The noble, now unrestrained in his determination to quell the rebellion, advanced towards us like a wolf cornering its prey. His gaze grew increasingly menacing. His hand, firm and controlling, clenched into a fist. "You have no idea what you've unleashed. What is revolt but the despair of lost souls?" he bellowed, his voice echoing through the hall like a funeral knell. Feeling fear rise like poison, I looked around me. Nobles hesitated, and some began to question the truths they had accepted without question until then. The servants, once timid, were now joining us, sharing the confidence and determination that filled the air. This was a sign. The seeds of change were sown in the court's very fabric, and it was time to act. "We are not lost souls," I mustered the courage to shout. All eyes turned to me, and the murmur of resistance intensified. "We are those who seek freedom." I never knew words could carry so much weight, but in that moment, I was the voice of the voiceless. I was enveloped by a sense of belonging, and adrenaline galloped. The princess by my side rose with me. Hope never had the right to be silenced. What we have sworn under the skies of oppression is not just a challenge, but our determination to live. Her presence by my side was like a shield, and the confidence she emanated was contagious. The faces in the court began to align, that mix of nobles and servants, tired of witnessing disdain and inequality, united, increasingly empowered. It was as if the oppression had for a moment dissipated, and those who once considered themselves weak now raised their voices, forming a chorus of protest against the old order. And amidst the tumult, I saw a new possibility: to organize the resistance. I pointed to those who showed determination. Unite. Let us agree to raise our voice against this tyrant who discourages us from being who we truly are. The fervor spread, and words turned into cries of liberation. The revolt began to be more than just talk. We were a movement. In the turbulence of the hall, a group separated and moved in the opposite direction from the noble. The desire for change was palpable, and alliances formed as more people joined us. However, as we created this new network of support, the noble's presence remained menacing, trying to weaken our courage with his power. "Many have already paid the price for straying from the path," he threatened, but his words no longer instilled fear. We raised our heads in defiance. We knew the fight was just beginning, but we were already stronger together. "Our bonds are beyond your threats," I shouted with vigor. It was then that the noble, furious, shook his fist and summoned the court guards. The atmosphere shifted. The clarity of what was needed became evident. We had no more time to hesitate. It was time to act, and the resistance emerged, not just as an idea, but as a force seeking to free itself. The moment to confront oppression became a stark reality. Chaos was about to reach its peak, and the battle for freedom was unfolding. The palace walls might crumble, but the revolution was already underway, and we were the voice of change, ready to tear down any barrier that tried to suppress us. The clamor in the hall turned into a roar, and the chaos seemed to reverberate throughout the palace. As the guards advanced, the whispers of apprehension increased, but the determination at the core of the resistance was even stronger. In this moment, we were not simply server and princess. We were an indomitable force. The noble, in his quest for control, gestured furiously. "You have no idea what you're doing. You're risking everything." His threat hung in the air, but the response was a chorus of united voices, each echoing the rejection of fear. The palace, with its imposing walls, was about to witness the rupture of its established order. "Let us then make a change," I continued, inspiring others to join, gesturing to those who still hesitated. The fervor in my chest pulsed as I turned to those who still feared. "If we stand still, we will be condemned to live under his dominion for all eternity. The choice is in our hands." As the guards, in gleaming armor, approached, I felt my heart race. But there was a wave of courage pulsing in everyone there. We watched as other nobles, realizing what was at stake, gathered behind us. These were those who no longer accepted oppression, and their faces showed a willingness to fight. The tension exploded when a voice among the servants cried out, "Give me courage!" At that moment, more people joined our side, stepping forward to meet us. The divisions were dissolving, and the echo of resistance shone brightly. The list of those whose lives had been touched by the court's cruelty grew longer, and we began to move as a single body. "Show us your power!" I shouted, and a plurality resonated in response. The energy in the air seemed palpable, and in that instant the revolution became real. A cry tore through the space, and a wave of courage erupted through the palace, holding the court in a state of paralysis. In an impulse, the guards advanced to disperse us, but we were no longer lost sheep. The resistance surged upon them. The clash became inevitable. The music of battle mixed with the clamor for freedom's claim, a symphony of courage that echoed against the cold walls. The battle raged amidst shouts and chaos. I moved with the princess by my side, each step fueling and being fueled by that new wave of hope. With clenched fists and determination in our momentum, we fought. The voices that were once silenced now took form, united in a single sound, a true chorus for change. And as we forged our way through the tumult, a new current emerged, prioritizing the connection that had been established between us. Every wound that marked our bodies became a measure of our struggle, but with every fall we rose even stronger, proving that we were not just raising our bodies, but also our indignation. In this decisive instant, like a lightning bolt of revelation, a clear symbol of the new era emerged. We were not just those who desired a better future. We were a force of transformation. The sound of the tumult carried echoes of a renewing future. And as the palace gates opened, a new essence began to take hold of the place. We left the battlefield with the wounds we carried, but also with the wisdom that we were not alone. The path ahead would be full of challenges, but together, under the banner of resistance, we decided to walk, and destiny was now in our hands. In that instant, we were more than survivors. We were the architects of our own future. The palace now pulsed like a living organism, filled with chaos and lives intertwined by struggle. The clamor of battle sounded deafening, but it was the music of freedom that echoed in our hearts. Beside the princess, we advanced with determination, each blow and each cry building a new path, not just against the guards, but against the tyranny that oppressed us. "Forward!" I shouted, feeling the collective energy grow as the resistance strengthened. The nobles who once feared to speak out began to join us, glimpsing hope amidst the darkness. The tyrannical noble was no longer a symbol of unshakable power, but a man weakened by the certainty of his own fragility. With each step we took towards the main hall. The ground trembled beneath our feet, as if the palace walls were conscious of our purpose. "It is here that we must claim our freedom," I cried, and the united crowd resonated in response. We were no longer mere shadows, we were an unbeatable force. When we finally reached the hall's gates, the noble awaited us, a figure of despair and fury. "You shall not pass!" he shouted, but his words now carried a weight that was dissipating. I affirmed with courage, "We are not here to be barred, but to claim what is ours." The revolution was already underway, and the decisive moment approached. The guards advanced, their determination wavering against the force of the resistance. The clash intensified, and the struggle became a reflection of our souls. Side by side, the princess and I faced not just an arrow shot or a sword cut, but the oppressor who tried to silence our voices. I realized that every wound endured strengthened us. Every cry increased our unity into a growing chorus. This hall, once a symbol of oppression, now began to breathe the hope of a new era. The sounds resonated, mixing with echoes of a renewing future. In an instant, the walls that once seemed insurmountable began to tremble, and the unity we had formed threatened to dismantle the entire structure of tyranny. The noble, cornered and transfigured by the loss of control, now struggled to maintain power in his hands. And with a glint of steel, the final confrontation began. The battle for freedom was about to culminate in a new era, and when the first blow resonated, I knew that moment would become the watershed between the oppression that had suffocated us and the freedom for which we had fought. With each attack, we became more than just combatants. We were the promise of a future where our voices would reign instead of silence. Victory was not just in the weapons we wielded, but in the determination burning in our hearts. Thus, as the tumult intensified, we knew we were shaping not only our struggle, but the future of an entire kingdom, challenging the chains that once bound us and raising voices of resistance. This was the time to rewrite our history. This battle would become an echo of courage that would resonate for generations. In the heat of the fight, we raised not only our bodies, but the idea that a different future was possible. History was being written, and we were ready to carve our legacy with bravery.